Yes. All right. How's everybody doing tonight?
Good.
Welcome to CR. My name is Dave Harris. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, a sinner saved by grace, who has struggled with chemical dependency and alcohol. I still struggle with anger, financial instability, and codependency. I am the youngest of 3 children. I have 2 older brothers. One is 2 years older than I, and the other is 11 years older. I grew up in a small town called Codman, Pennsylvania. There we go. Now we're on. Now I can hear me. All right. Before moving to Codman when I was 4, we lived in Glen Olden. During this time, my mom and dad were separated. I did not really remember too much of this because I was young. However, I do know my dad was always there for us when it came to sports and basic father-son functions. I also know my mom would take my brother and I to church, so I was introduced to God at an early age. My oldest brother was from a previous marriage that my dad had before he met my mom, and was not really in the picture at this time. However, when my dad came back home and my mom and dad's relationship was restored, Mom stopped taking us to church. It was around this time we made the move from Glen Olden to Codman. From the time I was about 4 until the time I was 9, God was completely absent in my life. We would only attend church on holidays, and every holiday I remember we had a party. I was around drinking and partying from a young age. Mom liked to drink on the weekends. I just thought this was a normal part of family life, and even the relatives would have parties where much alcohol was being consumed. Just like any family, I would get in fights with my brother. He would always torture me, and this drew me into a defensive mode from a young age. I was about 5 years old when he would push me into a hot barbecue grill in which I burned my leg. So here I am, a young child around casual drinking and arguing, being picked on by my brother. I figured this was just basic life. Nevertheless, I knew I was loved by my family. When I was 6 years old, my brother would sneak cigarette butts from the ashtray, and we would hide in the basement and smoke the butts. We had a huge wet bar in our basement, and we would hide back there and smoke them. We did this maybe twice. We would also pretend that we were bartenders. It was kind of what I knew at the time, and a way to have fun, never realizing how much of an effect it would have later on in my life. My dad was always into sports and would always want my brother and I to play them. My dad liked coaching and being involved, which to any kid would be great. However, one of the sports he wanted us to play was football. I did not want to play football. This angered him so much it scared me into playing football. This began to teach me anger. I loved playing baseball at the time, and my dad was the manager. I enjoyed him being a manager in a sport I liked. We won championships, walked in parades, all the fun things. At the age of 7, I started to take a liking to hockey. My brother and I would get together with our friends and play street hockey in the alleyways. This would continue for many years. Let's move forward now to 3rd grade. I always had friends in the neighborhood and went to school with them. My oldest brother had been around for a few months now and decided to join the Navy, where he would spend the next 11 years. I lived in a small neighborhood, so I had freedom to roam. We would play in the woods or the schoolyard. We also had a pool which we belonged to, so there was always something to do. When I was about 8 years old, I started to learn how to skate so I could play ice hockey. These were the best years. However, they would be robbed by drug use. It all began to change when I was in 3rd grade. I was forced to change schools halfway through the year. I went to Codman Elementary School. I loved that school. However, my brother started to have problems in the public school system. So my mom and dad decided to put us into Catholic school. I did not realize how hard this would be for me and the hurts I would experience. I thought this would be when God was put back in my life. However, there was one problem. I was just being put through the motions of Catholicism. I was not taught how personal God is and the relationship he seeks from each of us. As I entered into this new school, I had a mindset that in a Christian school, I would have no problem making new friends. However, this was not the case. I began to be picked on. I had one close friend in that school the whole 6 years I was there. However, the bigger kids would pick on me. I would be physically and verbally abused and bullied. This would make me feel so bad and insecure. It was a completely new experience for me, something I was not used to. I felt if I told anyone, I would be a rat, and that would just make things worse. So I endured it for the next few years. At 9 years old, I started to play organized hockey for the Haverford Hawks. I was so excited and looking forward to playing my first hockey season. I had tryouts, and I made the team. Tryouts turned out to be the easy part. Just like school, I was picked on by my teammates. They would insult me and steal my stuff. I just stayed quiet and let it build up. I acted as if all was fine. I did not want to have to fight my way through life to be accepted. At around this same time, my brother started to act out a bit. He was diagnosed with what we now know as bipolar. It was a tough time for the whole family. He was in and out of hospitals. He was using drugs. It was just a total meltdown for the whole family, for all of us. There would be many times for the next few years where I was alone if mom and dad went to see my brother in the hospital, and many times I was forced to go to the hospital with them. It all started to wear on me, but I just held it in. I thought to myself, they have enough on their plate. They don't need to hear me. I have it all together. I get to play hockey. Not many people can say that. But inside, I was a mess, very unstable, just going through the motions of life. I could not find God in all this, even after the repetitious prayers, the sacraments I made, and the strides I thought I was taking. I felt alone and discouraged. I felt a lot of pain inside, and I felt lost. 7th grade was approaching. I was 12 years old, and I met a girl from the neighborhood who would become my girlfriend for the next 8 months. This is the first girl I would try things with sexually, but never went all the way. This is the first girl I would fall in love with, so I thought at the time. Her dad made us stop seeing each other because she was 2 years older than I was. The summertime came. I was 12 years old and was with a friend. We went shopping with his mom, but him and I were five-finger discount shopping. This would be the first of my run-ins with the law. We were caught, which was a good thing, because I never turned out to be a thief in life. I learned my lesson at a young age. I was really on a roller coaster of a ride, path of living by this time, though. I was playing hockey and I loved it. We traveled to play, so we always did stuff together as a family. The entire time I was still being picked on by the kids in school, and as a family from time to time dealt with the bipolar, to the point where my brother could no longer stay with us. However, another school year was approaching and another hockey season. I met a friend while playing hockey that year who for the first time introduced me to marijuana. I knew about it from others in the family, but was never offered to smoke it. I thought, oh, maybe it would make me cool. Therefore, I began to smoke weed in 8th grade. This led to cigarettes for good, not just a few puffs hiding behind the bar. I also began to drink. I then began to feel accepted by everyone. All the kids who used to pick on me finally started to accept me and started to like me for once. I had a victory train of thought that all this stuff was starting to make me someone. Again, I thought I was saved. I thought I understood and knew Jesus. I accepted him as Lord and Savior. I believed as long as I go through the motions, I'll be fine. The whole summer was spent mainly drinking, since I really had no way to get any weed. But it was always easy to get a runner for beer. I would begin to snort Ritalin also that summer. This did not last long, however, it shows where I was at the age of 13. The entire time I was hiding it from my parents. I had the world on my side. I was of the world, and people liked me. I finally felt accepted. 9th grade approaches. I was entering another school after 6 years in the last school, this time with much more people. I was quite nervous about how the new kids would treat me. It took 6 years for the others to start liking me, but this time I had neighborhood friends who I knew had my back going to the same school. We were party buddies, a band of brothers who stuck together. If you messed with one of us, you messed with us all. So going into 9th grade turned out good. I soon had a reputation among the freshmen as the party man. I met another girl early in my first year and we began to date. The relationship would last for over a year. This would be the first relationship where I would have sex outside of marriage at the age of 14. This would be the second relationship destroyed by parents. I had also experienced a tragedy during this time. One of my closest friends at the time, his dad was fishing and never came back home. His dad was my dad's best friend. He went missing in the river for a whole month. It hit us all hard. The whole neighborhood was shocked. It was a close-knit area. By this time, my faith in God had diminished, and my relationship with Him was, well, I had none. I was living a double life. My parents thought, wait, let me back up. I did not believe in telling a priest what I'd done wrong, so I just never asked for forgiveness. I was bad in school. I was always high going to school. If I could have skipped class knowing I would not be caught, I would have. I was pretending to be someone I was not. I wanted to be the good kid for my mom and dad since my brother was always causing trouble. I was living a lie, a double life. My parents thought I was an angel and I was far from it. I had become a codependent to my peers. However, they knew I was getting into trouble. I would fight if I had to and just do whatever I could to get others to accept me. I liked when people would laugh when I did something wrong. I liked the attention. Nevertheless, my mom and dad had no idea. I was smoking weed and cigarettes, drinking beer, and having sex. I still played hockey, made practices, and made games. I would hide my problem. I did not think I had a problem. Everybody else was doing it, so why not me? I thought it was a normal part of growing up. At this point, I was living a life of sin that would lead me down a long path of insanity. Ninth grade came and went. I struggled through and just barely passed. I was determined I was not doing summer school, although I had to do 2 weeks for having too many detentions. I was pretty undisciplined. That summer after ninth grade, all my friends from the neighborhood had made connections with others outside the neighborhood. I was still with my girlfriend behind her parents' back. Finally, it would get to be too much and we had to break it off. This was crushing to me. I was hurt again. Nevertheless, I got over it and began to hang out with girls from outside the neighborhood. I would get bottles of beer, the cheapest kind I could get, throw it in a school bag, and take the bus out to hang out with the girls. I started to go to parties and I started taking LSD. I was also starting to have problems with the law again. I always managed to get away at first. Nevertheless, I was now addicted to marijuana, cigarettes, alcohol, women, and acid, and was just finishing ninth grade. My brother was about done with hospitals around this time, and when he was around, I started to smoke weed with him. We would go to parties and drink together, still never being caught. 10th grade came. It was a lot of the same. Not much has changed in my life from this point. I had girlfriends off and on, sometimes more than one at a time. They were not the godliest relationships. It was about 16 when I would have my second run-in with the law. I was with a few friends. We were out driving around and getting high when bang, we were T-boned by another car. While we were making a turn, thank God I was in the middle of two bigger guys, so I was well cushioned. However, the car we were driving belonged to my friend's dad. My friend did not have his driver's license at the time, and we would borrow the car from his brother at work, just to have fun and get out of Colwyn. The cops arrived at the accident, and the car stunk like marijuana. All the other guys who were in the car with us took off running, while I decided to stay with my friend. This would be the first ride for me in the backseat of a cop car, and my first look at the inside of a police station. A few weeks later, I was at a party and was arrested again, this time for underage drinking. It did not get my attention now. I just continued to go with the crowd. Junior year of high school had begun. I decided I was going to go to Vo-Tech, so I did. I was at 2 schools in one day. My high school was all guys. I had an opportunity to now be around girls. Amen, I thought. We always had an hour and a half to kill in between schools. So when we would take the bus, we would go off the property, get high, and come back to school. I started experimenting more and more with many types of drugs. Although I was a mess, I still never realized it. I continued to do things as normal. Again, I played hockey until I was 18. I just thought I was doing things a normal teenager does. Others influenced me. I had no foundation. I was living a double life, worrying if my parents would find out and how they would feel if they knew I was doing all this behind their back. The summertime during high school were just crazy. I would sleep out almost every night. In addition, I would party all night long. Junior year went smoothly and I passed. Senior year, the year I looked forward to for so long, I was finally close to graduating. In the beginning of the year, I met yet another girlfriend. I met her on the bus going to Vo-Tech. She was a junior in her high school. I dated her until Christmas vacation came around. While I was dating her, I met another girl on New Year's Eve. I would date this girl for the next year and a half. She would be the third girl I would fall in love with. I graduated high school and had a huge party. I then went away to senior week. This week would turn out to be 24/7 drink, drug, sex fest. I was with my girlfriend at the time for a whole week, this time without parental advisory. The night before we were about to leave to come back home, there was a fight between my girlfriend and one of my friends. This would destroy a relationship. I left with my girlfriend, leaving one of my best friends at the time down the shore. I have since made amends, but things were never the same. After high school, I had brought my first car with the money I got from graduation. It was a convertible, Chrysler Baron. This would be the start of my financial problems. I had wheels put on it, tinted the windows. It was hot. My girlfriend would go off to college, which was rough for the both of us. I would visit her while she was gone. Then one time when she came home for vacation, she tells me she cheated on me with 7 other guys. Once again, I was crushed. I again was hurt. I felt comfort nowhere else at the time, so I would just use. When I was 20 years old, I met the girl I thought was to be my wife. I was working full-time for a landscaping company. I went into a store and there she was. We would date for the next 4 years. I was so in love, things were perfect. I limited my drinking down to the weekends. I cut down on the drugs and would always smoke weed. All was good. I decided to start praying again also. This was a good thing, right? I prayed for our relationship to last forever. All was great. We had our arguments, but what couple doesn't? She was in college, but locally. Therefore, she commuted back and forth. We got to see each other each and every night, and on the weekends, she would stay over at my house. And I thought for sure she was the one. I thought this was it. So I asked her to marry me. She said yes. My prayers were being answered, I thought. 3 weeks later, however, I would be crushed again. Hurt deeply this time. She decided she did not want to get married and broke off the relationship. The 4th girl I ever loved, the one I loved the most, tore my heart out and stepped on it in front of my eyes. This drew me into a state of depression. I began to curse God. I started to believe God did not exist. I stopped praying and talking to God altogether. It took me 5 years from this point to believe in God again. After my brief state of depression, I started to drink a lot more heavily than before. In my early years, it was recreational. Now it turned out to be serious. I was drinking on a mission. My attitude toward women had changed. I have been hurt 4 times not knowing the reason for the last breakup. I was miserable. I still had friends, and they were all about the party. So I once again became all about the party. At this time, I am 24 years old. No purpose for my existence. I started to get addicted to cocaine to help me stay awake and party more. One night, while at the bar, I run into my ex-fiancée. I found out she had started using also. We set aside our differences as much as she hurt me and started using together. We never got back together at this point, but I did find a reason for her leaving. During these years, I did many crazy things, many dangerous things. I was always into heavy metal. I would sing in metal bands and just be completely hammered on stage. I was arrested twice for DUI in 2 states. I was a mess, completely out of my mind. I was functioning, however, so I was blind to the path I was traveling. I always worked a job, especially landscaping. That was my trade for many years. God didn't exist in my world. I did what I saw fit to do. I would once again have many girlfriends off and on and was using all the time. I would do snow removal and use, just to keep me going, driving plow trucks. At the age of 29, I pretty much accepted the fact of who I was. I hated life unless I was high. It was purposeless. I accepted the thought I would never amount to nothing. I was not particularly seeking change of any kind spiritually. However, I did change careers several times. I was always an honest worker, but somehow it always seemed when business got slow, I got the label. This has put a sour taste in my mouth for working for others. This would just fuel the addictions, and the hurts continued to build. I was at a convenience store one night, Wawa. and I was about to grab some money for drugs when my life would change. I was in the parking lot when I ran into a friend of mine. I have not seen him for several years. This would be the same friend from the earlier who was driving his dad's borrowed car when we got into an accident. He's actually here tonight, and his name is George. Thank you, George. We talked for a while, and he told me he'd become a Christian, which I did know. However, at first, we went to leave. Then George came back to my car a second time and extended a simple invite to come check out his church. I'm glad to say this is the church he invited me to. It was Easter Sunday, 2009. Therefore, George decided to invite me to the Easter service. I had no relationship with God at all. I claimed to believe he did not exist, but I was never too sure. I would say I more blamed him than anything else, not blaming my own choices. Therefore, I tried to deny him. That night, I did get high, but it was different. That night, however, I just kept hearing the words, "I invite you to come Sunday." I finally got some sleep Saturday morning, and when I awoke, I heard the same words, "I invite you." This time hearing also, "Come as you are." Something I believe George did not say in our conversation. I did not know at the time what this was all about, but I went to church that Sunday. I know exactly what I was thinking too. I thought if I get anything out of this, at least I got to see George. While I was at the service, I felt a very distinct, welcoming spirit. I also heard a small, still voice that spoke the words, "This is where I want you. This is where you belong. I want you to come back to me." I did not know what this meant at the time. I was blown away. However, I knew it was not anyone around me. That week at work, I was filled with joy. I felt a piece of it. I knew I had to do something. However, my change would not take place right away. God worked on me piece by piece, bit by bit, and continues to do so daily. I bought a Bible because I knew I had to. I was told to read the book of John. It was good advice. It teaches you really about who Jesus is. John would be the first book I read. I always knew the children's stories, but I never knew who God really is and what he expects from us, or even the most important thing, what he can do for us. May 15, 2009, I decided to pray the sinner's prayer and declare Jesus my Savior. For some reason, it took some time for me to decide to really take it serious. I knew I wanted to learn as much as I could. That summer, however, I still drank and did drugs and smoked. However, I stayed in the Word and gave God the chance to mold me. Towards the end of the summer, I knew I had to stop doing it. This was not God's will for my life. September came around. It was still the year of 2009. I was going to church on Sundays, and I had started to connect with other Christian brothers and sisters. I never was really looking for a change, but it would finally take place. I would quit drinking and stop using coke and started really digging into the Bible more and more. I was baptized in November of that year. I never did go through a 12-step program until Celebrate Recovery came to LCF. Nevertheless, as I began to work the steps, I realized, although I was past my addictions, I have many hurts I am still working through. I realized I still struggle with anger, and CR has helped me to discover new ways to handle it. CR has also helped me to work on my finances and to be a better steward. Since I decided to follow Jesus wholeheartedly, he has been challenging me to grow. I started to participate in things I would never have imagined me doing. I would go on my first missions trip in 2010. I was part of a team of 10. We went to Tijuana, Mexico to help build an orphanage. It was the most rewarding thing I had ever done. Jesus began to show me times in my life where he was trying to get my attention, but I was blind. He began to answer questions I had about past relationships, especially the one in which I was engaged and most confused about. I realized if it were not for all I went through, I would not be where I am today in the Lord. And the prayers for the relationship were not in line with his will for my life. I decided I wanted to take a step further in my faith. I was feeling the Lord calling me to preach the good news that I had found. I was obedient and decided I would take Bible courses online. I was involved heavily in ministry at this point, serving whenever and wherever I could. I have fallen in love with this new life that Jesus has brought me to. Psalm chapter 40 verse 2 says, He lifted me out of the slimy pit. Out of the mud and mire He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. I have 4 verses that are life verses for me. Psalm 42, Isaiah 53:5, which says, But He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon Him, and with His stripes we are healed. Jeremiah 29:11, which says, For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And 2 Corinthians 5:17. Wherefore, if any man is in Christ, he is a new creature. The old things are passed away. Behold, they are become new. These 4 verses have spoken volumes to my life. I was living a life in a slimy pit. To know Jesus had saved me and rescued me from that slimy pit, and healed me from the addictions of drugs and alcohol and disbelief, and had forgiven me was beside me. It is by His stripes we are healed. I was a sinner, deep in sin, disobeying the Father the whole time. To find how graceful He really is, and that I am forgiven and healed, and on top of that, knowing God knows my plans, keeps me moving forward in my faith. Then to add, He has made me a complete new creation. I have now completed 2 years of Bible college, and I have built a firm relationship with Jesus Christ. I have allowed Jesus to transform me and mold me into who He wants me to be today. I now have 2 more verses I have added to my list of favorites. They help me daily. Luke 9:23. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. It is a daily pursuit of Christ. We must deny ourselves. I must deny my pleasures, the things I once thought were most important to me, and seek after Christ. Anything else is foolish gain. I also use Colossians 3:10, which reminds me daily to put on the new self, which is being renewed in the image of its Creator. I am the clay, He is the potter. I know He is not finished with me yet. I am His masterpiece, a work in progress daily. He has shown me the plans for the next steps in ministry. I just have to remain in His truth and rely on the power of the Holy Spirit to stay strong daily and continue to pursue righteousness. I'm excited for the next big breakthrough God has in store for me. Thank you for letting me share my story.